I spent years believing that finding the right person would finally make me feel complete, that somewhere out there the right connection would fill the quiet restlessness I carried everywhere I went. I chased it with focus, with patience, with everything I thought love required. But the peace I was looking for never came. Not because I wasn't trying hard enough, but because I had built my entire sense of worth around being chosen by someone else. And that foundation was always going to collapse. I never questioned the belief that being in a relationship meant I'd finally arrived as a man. That being alone was something to fix, not something to understand. I confused the fear of loneliness with the desire for love. And I let that confusion guide every decision I made. I thought if I could just be patient enough, adaptable enough, persistent enough, then eventually the right person would see my value and everything would settle into place. I was working from a silent equation I never wrote down, but followed religiously. Effort plus patience equals emotional fulfillment, and I believed it completely. So I became whoever I thought I needed to be. I adjusted my personality to match what I thought they wanted. I changed habits, softened opinions, reshaped parts of myself I thought were too much or not enough. I performed closeness instead of actually being present. And the entire time I told myself I was just being flexible, mature, willing to grow. But really, I was disappearing. There were early signs that I was losing touch with who I actually was, but I ignored them. I convinced myself that compromise was supposed to feel like this, that love required a certain amount of self-erasure, that the discomfort I felt was just part of becoming the kind of man someone could love. The relationships I found myself in almost worked. They had all the surface conditions I thought I needed. Initial intensity, shared laughter, and moments that felt like proof it was on the right path. But then slowly, the emotional connection would start to erode. The excitement would fade into routine, the routine into distance, and the distance into a quiet kind of loneliness that felt worse than being alone. And every time it ended, I was confused. I couldn't understand why the same cycle kept repeating. I thought I was doing everything right. I thought I was learning from each experience, adjusting, becoming better. But the pattern never changed. What I didn't realize then was that I was mistaking attention for meaning. I wasn't actually chasing connection. I was chasing validation. I wanted to be wanted because being wanted felt like proof that I mattered. And for a while, that worked. The temporary high of someone choosing me, texting me first, and making plans with me, it felt like I was finally becoming someone worth staying for. But the crash always came. The moment they pulled back, went quiet, or showed distance, I felt the floor drop out from under me, because my sense of stability wasn't built on anything internal. It was built entirely on how someone else felt about me that day. And when that shifted, even slightly, I spiraled. The cost of constant pursuit was emotional exhaustion, but I didn't recognize it as that. I thought I was being resilient. I thought pushing through doubt and disappointment was what strong men did. So I kept trying harder, kept adjusting, kept believing that the problem was just a matter of timing or effort. I lost clarity about what I actually wanted, but I convinced myself I was growing. I was becoming more patient, more understanding, more emotionally available, and all of that might have been true. But I was also losing myself in the process. I was so focused on becoming what someone else needed that I stopped asking what I needed. I stopped listening to the quiet voice that kept saying, "This doesn't feel right." Eventually, I could no longer ignore the repetition. The same emotional arc kept playing out with different people. The same initial hope. The same gradual disconnection. The same painful recognition that I'd given more than I had to give. And the most uncomfortable realization was this. The common denominator in every failed relationship was me. Not because I was broken or unworthy, but because I kept entering these situations from a place of incompleteness. I kept looking for someone to fill a gap I hadn't even acknowledged existed. And I resisted accepting that truth for as long as I could, because accepting it meant admitting that no one else could fix what was missing, that the work I needed to do was internal, not external. Then came the moment it stopped feeling worth it. It wasn't dramatic. There was no explosive argument or devastating betrayal. It was just a quiet, deep exhaustion. I didn't have the energy to keep trying. I didn't have the will to perform interest, to manage someone else's emotions, to shape myself into what I thought they needed. I realized that all the effort I'd been pouring into relationships wasn't guaranteeing anything. Not connection, not stability, not peace. And for the first time, I didn't know what to do next. I'd spent so long believing that the answer was out there, in finding the right person, that I had no idea what to do when I stopped looking. So I stepped back, not because I had some grand plan for personal growth, but because I needed relief. I withdrew from dating, from pursuit, from the constant noise of trying to be seen. And what followed was an unfamiliar stillness. I didn't know how to exist in it at first. I'd spent so long defining myself through pursuit that the absence of it felt like floating in open water with no direction. But I stayed there anyway, mostly because I didn't have the energy to do anything else. And in that emptiness, something unexpected began to happen. In that stillness, I had to learn to sit with myself, and that meant confronting the silence I'd been avoiding for years. All the thoughts I had drowned out with distraction, with plans, with hope, they all surfaced, and they were uncomfortable. I had to face the fact that I didn't really know who I was outside of wanting to be chosen. I didn't know what brought me peace when no one was watching. I didn't know how to be alone without feeling like I was waiting for something better to start. But slowly, that discomfort turned into awareness. I started noticing patterns in my thoughts, my reactions, my fears. I started seeing how much of my identity had been built around avoiding this exact moment of quiet self-confrontation. I started to understand the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness, I realized, wasn't actually about being alone. It was about abandoning myself. It was the feeling I got when I ignored my own needs, my own boundaries, my own sense of direction, just to keep someone else interested. Solitude, on the other hand, was presence. It was the ability to be with myself without needing to fill the space with noise or validation. And the first time I felt that internal stability, even for just a moment, something shifted. I realized that the restlessness I had been trying to fix with relationships wasn't about being single. It was about refusing to be present with myself. I began letting go of the need to be chosen, not because I stopped wanting connection, but because I started to understand how much energy that need had consumed. How much of my life had been spent performing, adjusting, waiting for approval. And when I stopped feeding that need, I had space to observe myself, to see my patterns clearly, to recognize how much I'd been running from my own company. I started asking different questions. Not why doesn't anyone stay, but why do I keep leaving myself? Not what's wrong with me, but what am I avoiding by constantly seeking external validation? Freedom started to mean something different. It was no longer about having endless options or keeping possibilities open. It was about internal steadiness. It was about not reacting to every opportunity for connection just because it appeared. It was about choosing peace over the possibility of feeling wanted for a night, and that required a completely different kind of strength than I was used to. It required the discipline to say no, not to other people, but to my own impulses. To the part of me that still wanted to fill the void with someone else's attention. A quiet confidence started to build. There was no urgency to fill space anymore. No need to prove my value through someone else's attention. I could be present in a room, in a conversation, in my own life, without constantly scanning for validation. My presence became enough. not because I had achieved some state of perfection, but because I had stopped abandoning myself every time I felt the pull of external approval. I started trusting my own judgment again. I started making decisions based on what felt right to me, not what I thought would make me more appealing to someone else. I started seeing relationships differently, too. They are no longer solutions to an internal problem. They were extensions of a life that already felt stable. I could finally recognize the difference between wanting someone and needing them. Wanting came from a place of addition. Needing came from a place of deficit. And I had spent years operating from deficit without even realizing it. I'd been looking for someone to complete me, when what I actually needed was to stop breaking myself apart in the first place. I built a life that didn't collapse in silence, a daily routine that grounded me instead of distracting me, hobbies, habits, rhythms that existed independent of anyone else's input. And slowly, I started to trust myself, not in some loud, declarative way, but in small, quiet moments. I trusted that I could handle disappointment, that I could sit with uncertainty, that I didn't need someone else to make my life feel meaningful. I started showing up for myself the way I had always shown up for others, with patience, with consistency, with the belief that I was worth the effort. What followed was an unexpected calm. The emotional highs and lows I had grown so used to started to even out. There was less excitement, sure, but there was also more peace. And I came to understand that calm wasn't the absence of feeling, it was strength. It was the ability to not be thrown off course by every shift in someone else's interest or attention. It was the foundation I had been searching for all along, and I'd been standing in it the entire time without realizing it. I used to think I was missing out, that stepping back from pursuit meant watching life pass me by while everyone else found what I was looking for. But over time, I reframed that absence of chaos as clarity. I stopped comparing my path to everyone else's. I stopped measuring my progress by relationship milestones. And I recognized how much noise I had once normalized as necessary, how much drama I had mistaken for passion, how much instability I had confused with intensity. The man I became didn't happen through dramatic transformation. It happened through restraint, through choosing not to chase, through learning to stay with myself even when it felt easier to reach outward. My identity stopped being built on reaction and started being built on consistency. And that consistency, that ability to remain steady regardless of external validation, became the foundation I had been searching for all along. I stopped needing every interaction to mean something. I stopped treating every conversation as an audition. I just existed, and that was enough. Singlehood taught me something I never expected. It taught me that independence isn't isolation. It's alignment. It's the ability to move through the world without abandoning yourself in the process. It's learning to stay instead of chase. And more than anything, it's learning that you don't need to be completed by someone else. You just need to stop leaving yourself behind every time you feel alone. You need to stop treating your own company as something to escape from. If you're still in the cycle, I want you to know this. The confusion you feel is normal. The exhaustion is real. The repeated patterns don't mean you're broken. They mean you're human. And you don't need to feel shame for trying, for hoping, for believing that the next person might be different, but you also don't need to solve it all at once. You don't need to have all the answers right now. You can pause. You can step back without it meaning you've given up. Awareness is more valuable than action right now. Small shifts, quiet observations, moments where you choose not to react, those are the beginning of clarity. And clarity doesn't demand that you fix everything immediately. It just asks that you stay present with yourself long enough to see what's actually true, long enough to recognize which patterns serve you and which ones drain you. The strength in stepping back isn't about giving up on connection. It's about refusing to abandon yourself in the pursuit of it. Space isn't failure, it's necessary for understanding. And the ability to not react, to not chase, to not fill every silence with motion, that's not weakness, that's maturity, that's the kind of strength that actually builds something sustainable. You are not behind. You're not losing time. You're not falling short because you haven't found what others seem to have found. Your worth has nothing to do with your relationship status. And your progress isn't measured by external milestones. It's measured by how well you've learned to stay with yourself, by how much you've stopped abandoning your own needs in the hope that someone else will fill them. The truth that took me longest to accept was this: peace was never going to come from finding someone else. It was only ever going to come from learning not to abandon myself in the process of looking, from building a relationship with myself that was strong enough to withstand the absence of external validation, from becoming the kind of person I would want to stay for. You don't become whole when someone stays, and you become whole when you learn not to leave yourself, when you stop treating your own presence as temporary, when you stop waiting for permission to value your own company. That's when everything changes. Not because you suddenly become immune to loneliness or desire, but because you finally have a foundation that doesn't crumble the moment someone else walks away.